You're listening to Beat Autoimmune and Thrive, the podcast all about reversing and preventing autoimmune conditions so you can live your most vibrant life as soon as possible. We talk about autoimmune root causes, actionable solutions, and inspirational healing stories. I'm Palmer Kippola, and I used to have MS. Today, I'm an author, a speaker, a functional medicine certified health coach, a pickleball player, and nature lover who's helped thousands of people reclaim their health and their best lives. Let's dive into this episode. Welcome back. Today, we have a hugely important topic, one that's frequently overlooked or swept under the rug, neglected or misunderstood. But as we'll soon see, it's a topic that refuses to be ignored, and that is the topic of childhood trauma and the profound, well-established connection to autoimmunity and other diseases even decades later. So before you decide this isn't for you because you don't think you have trauma, consider that my guest says that everyone has trauma, and most importantly, we all have the opportunity to completely heal and transcend trauma. My guest today is Dr. Keesha Ewers. She's board certified in functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. She's a doctor of sexology, a trauma-informed psychotherapist, family practiced advanced registered nurse practitioner with a specialty in integrative medicine. She's a MAPS certified MDMA-assisted psychotherapy therapist, a conscious dying doula, and the founder and medical director for the Academy for Integrative Medicine Health Coach Certification Program. Wow, just an absolutely incredible background. She's been in the medical field for over 30 years, and after she conducted the HURT study in 2013, and HURT stands for Healing Unresolved Trauma, she developed the HURT model for understanding how past childhood trauma impacts adult health. This led to the creation of the Freedom Framework that she used to reverse her own autoimmune disease and has now used to help hundreds of her patients do the same. Dr. Keesha Ewers leads Mystic Medicine Deep Immersion Healing Retreats out in her home outside of Seattle, Washington. She's also the host of a mother-daughter duo podcast, which I've been enjoying, called Liberating Generations: How to Break Free from Intergenerational Trauma. I've had the pleasure of being part of Dr. Keesha's Reverse Autoimmune Disease Summit, and I've so enjoyed our generative and expansive conversations. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by Keesha, and I know we're going to go deep and wide into childhood trauma and the connection to autoimmune disease and the beautiful opportunity for healing. Welcome, Keesha.
Thanks, Palmer. It's a delight and an honor to be here.
It is just a profound one, and I like to start with stories. So we're going to go pretty deep, pretty fast. You've got your own experience with childhood trauma, which led you to develop an autoimmune condition in your 30s. You've got your own healing journey. Can you take us back and go as far as you like, hitting on the highlights?
Sure. I'll start with, I'm 58 now. When I was in my early 30s, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, was the autoimmune disease that woke me up. I was a marathon runner. I was raising 4 children. I was trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect nurse, the perfect everything, perfect mother. And one day I woke up overnight, just like my patients experience this, where all of a sudden it was like someone had taken the batteries out of the Energizer Bunny, and I was just flattened and had red inflamed joints. They were puffy. I'd gained 10 pounds literally overnight of just this puff. And I got in to see a doctor, and she asked me, do you have a family history of autoimmunity? And, I thought about it and said, yeah, I think my paternal grandfather had it and was in a wheelchair when he died. And he died when he was my current age right now. And I never knew him. And she said, okay. And she, ripped off 2 prescriptions for me, methotrexate and a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and said, come back when you're worse, not if, and we'll change your meds. And I said, well, hang on. Like I do a lot for my health. I'm very disciplined. Is there anything else? I make my own food. What else can I do? And she said, no, I'm afraid it's genetic. And that was sort of the end of the story. She left the office, the exam room. And on my way home, I remember thinking, I believe my medical model probably doesn't have the answers to this. It's called incurable, and it's like symptom managed, obviously. And I don't really want to take these meds. I know the side effect profile already. So I wonder if there's a different way. And so I went into the research and I found an article on yoga and autoimmunity. I went to my first yoga class the next day. And the yoga teacher, he was saying enough in, this first yoga practice I'd ever done about Ayurvedic medicine that it intrigued me. And Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. It's the medical aspect of it. It's 10,000 years old from India. And I went home and I looked that up. And I discovered that what they had to say about autoimmunity all those years ago was that this was undigested anger. And I just remember sitting back and thinking, I've never considered digesting emotions, what is undigested anger exactly, and thinking I also didn't believe myself to be an angry person. And maybe that had something to do with it and why I ran so many miles. And so I started learning how to meditate. I went to yoga regularly. And in the process of it, I started examining this word autoimmune as, oh, this means I'm doing this to myself. I wonder if there's a time when I actually wanted to die because I'm killing myself. And I thought I'm just going to go backwards and kind of look and see. And I found this little girl version of myself who was 10, who was being sexually abused by the vice principal of my elementary school. And I remember thinking, okay, this part of me, this version wanted off the planet. My dad was out to sea in the Navy, had been for some months. I tried to tell my mom what was going on, but I didn't actually know myself and I didn't have the right words. I just didn't want to go to school. And so, she sent me to school because I wasn't clear on what was happening. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, I'll bet this is connected. I'll bet that somehow this desire not to be here informed my cells in some way 20 years ago. And here it is, and it turns out science today tells us that it's completely accurate, that it takes anywhere from 10 to 30 years to develop a full-blown autoimmune disease. It's not overnight. And that, yes, indeed, past trauma and the way you manage your stress currently and current day trauma does affect and impact your genetic expression. Here I had this in my genetics. It impacts the ecosystem of your gut, your microbiome. It impacts your hormones, your endocrine system, which is your messenger relay system from brain to body. It impacts how well you're able to detox the toxic burden that is on the earth right now that we've created and the load that you carry. It's so interrelated, this thing called trauma, with every other aspect of health that functional medicine looks at. Sometimes we'll go into mold or we'll go into heavy metals, we'll go into bacteria and viral and fungal and parasitic infections. And we really like to stay there, right? It's like, oh, here's something I can kill. Here's something I can chelate. Here's something I can eradicate. Here's something that has like a formula to fix it. Well, a lot of my patients arrive at my doorstep quite angry after years of chasing those things and still not having their autoimmune disease reversed. So mine reversed within 6 months without meds. And I think in large part because that day that I said, I'll bet these are connected. And I went straight into really working on that level as well as some of the other shifts that I made from my genetics, the information from my genetics that told me that I was intolerant to gluten, and that sugar was actually quite poisonous for me. And some things like that I had changed, and I'd gotten about 60% better. But I hadn't gone to that reversal place. No, I haven't had RA for all of these years, decades. And I know it's because as I have been working with this digestion of trauma, I always tell people, you're not trying to transcend your trauma. You're not trying to get rid of your trauma. You're not even trying to heal your trauma. That's not the idea. The idea is that you're actually, just like if you eat an apple and you're digesting, you take the nutrients and you get rid of what is no longer necessary. Those little bits of like what we call nutrients from our food help to make healthy tissues for us. It is the same with how we process and digest our memories and experiences of life. And it's important that we do that fully because that is the only way that we get wisdom. And, letting go of the victim story, which we've all been victimized in some way, shape, or form by some aspect of life, because that's part of the human condition, and keeping the wisdom, right? That is a pathway to recovery, and it doesn't end. There's not an end point for the gaining of wisdom. Yeah.
Wow. That was perhaps one of the most beautiful descriptions of trauma that I've heard, and just profoundly amazing. I have several thoughts about this. I love the idea of digesting your trauma, keeping the good stuff, and releasing what no longer serves you, what no longer serves us. And I also serve an autoimmune community and collaborate with naturopathic doctors, and people want the quick fix, even if it's holistic, right?
I did too.
The supplements, right? We all want the shortcut from A to Z.
That magic wand.
Where is it? Where is it? And most people, and sometimes, food is the easiest thing to get started with.
Yeah.
And we do the low-hanging fruit first, and that's fine.
Which is super important.
Which is super important. But as you start to feel better, and like Keesha said, if you're not 100% better after you look at food and after you consider those common infections, the yeast, the parasites, the mold, and so forth, there's something more that's going on. And I would contend that this undigested trauma is certainly a huge, huge factor in the equation. Now, I know a lot of people might say, well, I don't have trauma, so this doesn't apply to me, right? How common do you feel like that is? Because I think most people think that trauma is something with a capital T, that you were in a war, there's those big things, an accident, the death of a parent. Those are certainly big things that we can see. Yeah. But we know there's profound research that's available that shows us that it's way more than the capital T trauma. So can you talk a little bit about your perception of why everyone has trauma?
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to show you something. This is a map that I use often when I'm teaching. And I love it because it just kind of explains this, first of all, right? So when we're born, we're innocent, right? We have this innocence down here.
And for those of you who are not watching YouTube and are only listening to this podcast, I'm going to describe what I'm seeing on Keisha's beautiful image, right?
So at the bottom of this map is the word innocence. And I think we can all agree on that. Anyone that's held a baby in their arms, right? And knows like there's this gorgeous innocence that goes with that first arriving into the world, right? Well, what happens, and this is what I describe as part of the human condition, and I believe strongly it's one of the reasons we're here, is we go through another part of the map that goes from innocence to wisdom as we age and we move into elderhood. Now, wisdom's at the top of the map because that would be we're very linear humans. We like to make straight lines. We like to have order. We like to have formulas, right? And so this helps. I'm a backpacker. I love going in the backcountry for days on end. And so at the trailhead, I have to fill out a little card that says who I am, how long I'm going to be back there, how to contact someone if I happen to fall off a cliff. And I have a map right there that says, here's where I am and here's where I'm going. So I'm just going to point to on the map, we're all going to wisdom. Elderhood is meant to be the place of wisdom, the place where we can then turn toward the younger generation and impart, hopefully some parts of what we've been through and learned so they don't have to do it. Like fire is hot, don't touch it, right? There's some of us who don't like to believe the elders and touch it anyway. Go, oh yeah, that is hot. And so between the innocence and wisdom, there's a big bubble here that says heartbreak, betrayal, and trauma. Okay. That I just want to say is the natural state of a human's life. it isn't that somehow you were robbed of a completely innocent childhood. Actually, it's not supposed to be that way. We are meant to experience heartbreak, betrayal, and trauma as part of living. And I find a lot of my patients and people that come into my plant medicine world and journeys, and trauma healing retreats will have this expectation that somehow their parents were supposed to have protected them from heartbreak, betrayal, and trauma in some way, right? And I'm going to come back to this delineating kinds of trauma. That during this process where you feel rejected at some point, you feel betrayed, your expectations weren't met, your heart was broken in some way, you could have been, you didn't get what you wanted for Christmas, like it's just some kind of expectation not being met.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's disappointment. And in that space of disappointment, our ego develops, and this is called by many psychiatrists and psychologists in, the past, false self. These parts of us, internal family systems, it's often called parts, right, are the ones that we bring forward to protect that little innocent psyche. The one that wants to protect us, the one that wants to judge if we're doing right from wrong, the one that wants to manage everything, and when we move into adulthood, these are kind of in charge because we've mastered them. Everyone that thinks they're not a good meditator, you're an excellent meditator because whatever you've been meditating on your whole life, you've mastered. Now, it may not be what you want to have mastered, but you've mastered it at this point. And so when people don't actually get go along with your script of how expectations should happen, then you can have resentment and frustration and bitterness, which actually is the most toxic toxin that your cells have to bathe in, is the chemical made by your own mind, right? That is bitterness, frustration, resentment. It's not from BPAs, from glyphosates, even though those are very, very toxic, carcinogenic. Actually, the chemicals in your mind that are based on this are far worse for you. And that's what science shows us. So at some point, like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, you might hear my voice, you might have worked with Palmer, you might have read something, you might have hit your own rock bottom with this and kind of rose up. That's what happened with me, and said, gosh, every time I'm upset, I'm present. Maybe it isn't about all those people out there. Maybe I have something to do with this. And so that's kind of a call to learn new skills. Okay. And developmental states then can expand in adulthood. So this I call engaging in compassionate self-confrontation. Really get curious about your own thoughts, not thinking that they are somehow golden and true all the time, but maybe they're based on some early meanings that you created as a child when confronted with experiences that you didn't have the skills to navigate yet. So from there, you enter into the space on the map that says healing, integration, and freedom or liberation. And that's when you get in touch with who you really are, which is called Christ consciousness. It's called Buddha nature. It's called pure awareness, Rigpa, your true self. All these names are identifying the same thing, which is your vast, infinite, spacious consciousness that cannot actually be hurt, right? It's the one that leaves this body when you're done with it. And as you go through that healing, right, this digestion to the wisdom parts of all of the things that you've been through in your life, you develop true compassion. That's the outcome instead of resentment and bitterness. So this is normal. And that's what I'm often on rooftops trying to say to people is, rather than saying, my shitty parents, which, I have narcissistic parents too. Or, this terrible event that happened to me when I was this age, and again, nobody, no child deserves to have those kinds of experiences. And one of the things I teach is, and yet they do. And as much as we don't want that to be the truth, it is the truth. And so trauma comes in so many shapes and forms and sizes. And it's any experience that you have that you don't know how to navigate yet. You haven't gained the skill set yet. It's going to be traumatic.
Yeah.
I remember standing in PE looking at the presidential challenge rope that I was supposed to climb and going, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get to the top of that. And it's going to be in front of everybody. This is going to be so humiliating. That was so traumatic for me. Who would ever put that in a psychology book as a form of trauma? Nobody. Nobody. And yet, standing in that line, right, watching people sometimes get to the top, all the boys like scurrying up to the top of the rope, hitting the roof, coming down, and the girls sometimes doing it and other times not, and me just knowing I'm not going to get to the top of that rope. That was so embarrassing, And so that stands out for me. And yet it is not any kind of trauma you would ever identify. But there was a meaning attached to it. And there was a belief that I came away with. And then there was an adaptive behavior that I chose right then that once you get into adulthood becomes maladaptive. So it's really important as you go through, it's not until you're 26 years of age that you actually have a prefrontal cortex in your brain that's fully developed. We call that your adult brain. Everything you experience prior to 26 years of age, you're going to have attached meanings and beliefs and created adaptive behaviors that were really smart for the wise mind of the child you were at that time. However, you've grown up. And so now you have this opportunity to go back and look at some of those things. Like my mom used to bake really amazing desserts. My family, a family of sugar addicts. And so I would come home from school and school was stressful. I loved it, but I was a Navy brat. And, I'd get dropped into a new school in the middle of the year every 6 months or so. But the constant was when I got home, there was always some yummy dessert waiting and cooling on the counter for my after school snack. So the meaning is school's stressful, right? But I always excelled at it. But it was still, to come home and just go, oh, now I can let everything down, right? The belief was I had to be perfect in school so that I could get my parents' attention, who were kind of intellectual elitists, and come home and just completely let all that go with this, what at the time was an adaptive behavior to that stress, and eat something with sugar in it. And then I'd get perked up, feel great, and could sit down and do my homework. In college, I was eating Reese's peanut butter cups in the same way. When I was exhausted, I'd reach for something sugary, and then I would perk up. And I would be able to do my studying and my exams and everything and do really well in school. Well, when I got diagnosed with RA, I hadn't even examined any of those patterns that this child made up, right? It isn't about just stop eating sugar. It was getting into what was the belief I had? What meaning did I make up back then? What was this now maladaptive behavior responding to? Right? What was it a reaction to that was in my own mind? So this is why I always say, like, you don't want to try and muscle through habit change with willpower, because Benjamin Hardy, others have shown willpower is very finite. And by about 2:00 in the afternoon, you've dumped your bucket of it, So by 3, whatever you said you were going to do in the morning is forget it, right? If you're using your willpower. This has to be healed at a different space where you're going back to your child part and you're educating that one with some piece of wisdom that they didn't have someone there to teach them in that moment. And no child has a really attuned, grounded, very wise caregiver with them 24/7. It just isn't the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to go through life in this way.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like the biggest message I try and get people to really relax into is, you weren't robbed of a life you were supposed to have. You're living the life that you're supposed to live. And there are so many opportunities in adulthood to then really digest, the places where you might have some emotional constipation, you know, and gain the wisdom from some of those very, very traumatic, maybe, maybe you don't have capital T trauma and yay, right? You do have heartbreak, rejection, and betrayal, though. Everyone does. And so this is a really great opportunity when you have a beautiful autoimmune disease. It's autoimmune. It's saying, hey, I'm asking for some attention. I'm asking for you to really get curious about the experience of this body and not just bully me into submission and expect me to behave in a certain way without actually communicating with me and collaborating with me with compassion.
Wow. Again, Keesha, so very beautiful. And so we can go in so many different directions. One of the things that I want to touch on, three things that came out of what you just said. The first thing, I'll start with the last thing you said, is to get curious. Symptoms are simply messages from your body letting you know that something is out of balance, something is requiring your attention. And what you just described is the opportunity for living an examined life, because I believe that most of us are just doing the best we can living, and we're living on autopilot. And sometimes it takes really severe messages from our body, these symptoms, to get our attention, where it says, okay, I surrender. I have to do something about this. I can no longer normalize these headaches or this numbness or this joint pain or insomnia or fatigue, you name it, hair loss. I mean, this is not normal. This is not aging.
Right.
This is an invitation to get curious. What is happening? What's going on, as I always say, under the hood?
Mm-hmm.
And that under the hood might have even started before you were born.
Right.
So this is profound. So you could view this autoimmune, I don't say disease, I say condition, because it's conditional, based mostly on how you live. It's an invitation for you to become who you truly are. This is an invitation to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope everyone that is listening to this is not offended by the way that we're talking about this. Like, this is my RA or my MS, and how dare you, really tell me that I've got to accept this as a gift.
Or that this is your fault.
Or that this is your fault.
Yeah, and that's not actually the stage of development that you're in when you hear fault, shame, right? Blame is in a child state of development. And so we have 9 different levels of adult evolutionary expansion into that gets larger and larger and larger, our stages of development. Unfortunately, we're not taught those you have to be in like leadership development. Suzanne Cook-Gruder was one that took Levenger's work in the 60s and in the 70s when she was at Harvard doing her research. She really took that and made these 9 levels really fleshed out. And then Ken Wilber took that and uses it in integral theory and in his work. But, certainly Fox News, NBC, CBC, CBS are not talking about this, like that we have developmental states. We're not static. So one of the things you and I were talking about off air was how people will ask, I've been working on my trauma for years. At what point am I done? And I remember being in therapy and opening my eyes and looking at the therapist and saying, this very thing, like, am I going to keep going back here again and again and again? And she just looked at me with so much kindness in her face. And it was almost like she was saying, oh, grasshopper, it was like, she said, I know, she goes, the mine shaft that you created in childhood through your experiences is what you will climb down into for the rest of your life to pull out the gold nuggets of wisdom. And that really landed. And what I add to that today is the material. Like, okay, so if you read, let's just pick a book, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. So if you read Great Expectations when you were in high school, my dad was a big Dickens fan, so I read all of Dickens. And so if you read it in high school, you'll get something from it based on the developmental state that you're in, how you perceive, how you process it. And then I went back and I read Great Expectations again when I was in college. And it was like it was a different book. It wasn't a different book. I was a different person. That intrigued me so much that I've picked up Great Expectations every 4 or 5 years since then. And it's fascinating to me how it's like it's a different book. And yet I know it's not a different book. It's me that is different. So your experiences in life have already passed, just like the book has already been published and written, right? It's on the shelf. So those have already been experienced. But who you are is supposed to shift. You are not a static being in an organic, constantly changing environment. That's just not the way it goes. You are also an organic, constantly changing being in an organic, constantly changing environment. You are meant to grow. And so if you accept that, which is a capital T truth, that everything is impermanent, everything that you can lay your eyes on, think about, is impermanent. It will turn to dust. It will die. It will be taken away, right? That's just how it works. Everything dies. Everything turns to dust eventually. What we cling to as what we think will bring us happiness is going to cause us suffering because those things are going to change. So the more that you develop and you advance in your developmental states and levels, the more you accept that to be a capital T truth of life. Change is inevitable as much as we hate it. And there are no straight lines, only the ones that humans try to make. But in nature, if you look outside my windows, there is not one straight line out there. So we are out of alignment basically with the environment that we're living in until we're not. Then your story of trauma will change, not because the trauma itself changed, but because you're in a more expansive developmental state. And the trauma itself is part of the catalyst for that. Does this mean that you have to thank perpetrators? And I have a whole process I do with people, and you can't leapfrog to the end. You can't. You have to digest. You can't look at this apple and say, I instantly want the nutrients from this without chewing it, without swallowing it, without all the enzymes being released, the stomach acid being released, the peristalsis, the pooping out what you don't need. None of that stuff can be circumvented. It is the same with life experience of moving from, pain, unmet expectations, suffering, into wisdom. So we are never done, hopefully, because we're ever evolving, ever expanding. And the thing that, if you want to think about like a goal, is that your recovery is so much quicker when you notice your mind going sideways. So remember that this isn't a brain thing. People always want to make this about a brain, like the vagus nerve and the nervous system and the sympathetic override or arousal. Yes, but that's not what starts the ball rolling. What starts the ball rolling is your perception, which is mind, which is not located in brain. Mind is everywhere, including in your body. And so how you view yourself in the world and with your experiences and with all of the, life itself that you're sharing life with, is that activates brain. So that's where I work. I mean, great if you have a vagus nerve stimulator, great if you're doing limbic retraining and all of the things, right? Great. And that is a symptom manager. That's not actually getting at you witnessing yourself as co-creator of your life. That's impossible. You have to do that work yourself. And there's no shortcut. So this is the thing. And again, it's not something that you can rush through. Americans, man, we love our immediate gratification. And I had to learn this. I'm very efficient. I want to be efficient. This is not an efficiency task. This is moving from doing to being.
Yeah. So another beautifully stated process that you've shared. One of my questions was, what does well-digested trauma look like?
Yeah.
Because I kind of want to frame this as bookends. And I want to, because people are goal-oriented, and I can hear the collective groan, oh my God, you mean I'm going to have to do this forever? I like to have in my
I want to read something from someone in my plant medicine community who I will remain nameless if I can find it really quickly. She posted it in our group this morning, and it was so beautiful. So she's saying, may I share my complete awe in seeing, feeling, and experiencing with the last 2 plant medicine journeys, but she's been doing this for 7 years. I asked for help to see the ways I've grown and developed. And she thinks of them right now like martial arts belts, right? So she's like, oh, that's kind of cool to think of it as different colors of belts where I've been and where I'm moving to. So, she has a narcissistic mother who she, for some period of time, didn't talk to because there was so much toxicity, and, a jealous mom. And if you ever look up jealous mother of daughter, there's a whole thing there. And she had that, and I pointed it out to her and I helped her with it. Then the next step after you take that space and you learn how to develop your own core, selfhood and heal, digest, right? So now she's saying, words can't express the warmth that radiates through my body, the colors, the shapes that develop as I'm in the presence of my mother this weekend. It's been a year since I saw her, and it's a lovely visit. For the first time in my life, I had no anxiety, no stress leading up to seeing her. The only thing different in the equation was me. I am different.
Wow.
I listened to stories I had heard before, responded with compassion to her mom. That must have been painful for you. I had boundaries where I responded with holding people with compassion for their experience and their own journey. And where I was being asked to join in collusion, I didn't. My lens has changed. I saw her with compassion. The pain, the bitterness, the resentment, the expectations were not present. My experience changed. I actually saw and felt with curiosity that's referenced so many times in circle, like what you picked up on, right? And I left after spending 7 hours peaceful with her, with compassion for her, and continued to process as I drove for the next 2 hours. So, she's celebrating with this community this change that isn't in her family dynamic. It's not her mom.
No.
Her mom's the same. It's her.
Yeah.
That's what really good digestion looks like.
Wow, what a beautiful way to answer that question. I must have heard the word compassion about 5 times in that one little paragraph. And I also saw healthy boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I saw
Yeah.
that there was a separation that was healthy.
Yep.
So that she could be an observer and still in her own body, taking responsibility for how she responds. And I view this in a way, it's moving from reacting to responding. And we
That's
call it the
exactly right.
stress response, and I think of it as a stress reaction. When we move from that instant reaction, that reactivity that doesn't require any prefrontal cortex, that's our primitive brain is on. But the mastery, the growth, the development is when we can actually respond in a way that serves us. And honestly, I mean, her mom and other people must feel this as well, even though she didn't say anything to her mother.
Exactly. And when you are eating well and you're digesting appropriately physically, the side effects of that are glowing, clear skin, right? I don't wear any makeup on my skin. It's fair, and I'm 58. I mean, I have beautiful skin, not because of all the things I put on it, but because of what I feed it, right? It's this lovely juice and, and so it's the same thing with emotional digestion, with memory digestion, with experience digestion. You'll have that glow in your energy field, in the way that you view life and how you perceive everything in it. So it's the same exact thing, but in a more subtle body than your physical one.
Oh, that is so absolutely lovely. And another question that I get frequently, as if there is only one way to trauma healing, is what is the best modality? So that's another very American thing, is to
It
ask,
really is.
what's the best? I want the best and the fastest
And
path
I love that
to
question
healing.
as it indicates that there's curiosity starting and a willingness to engage. And uh, there isn't one way for every single person, just like there's not one way that your body became imbalanced. There's no formulaic answer to that. And so the willingness to just engage, like I do brain spotting, I do EMDR, I do hypnotherapy, plant medicine journeys, trauma healing without plant medicine journeys. This weekend, I have 6 wonderful women coming into my space for 4 days. They're doing trauma work without plant medicine. It's because they are where they're at, and this is what will be most beneficial and useful for them. I use internal family systems. So people will say, oh, I've done this and it doesn't work, or I've done this and it worked really well. And it's important to recognize that it's not the modality, it's you. And in Buddhism, it's called the view. And so as your view expands and goes from this sort of self-referential, solid individual entity and moves more into, I hold the cosmos within.
Mm.
And when I experience pain, I can invite all beings' pain in as I inhale and exhale compassion. Your pain dissipates.
Mm.
And so the training that I do with people, the work that I do with people is learning how to get there. And that's going to be different for everyone.
Those are fantastic indicators as to whether or not you've already dealt with trauma. If you feel like you're done, like where are you on the compassion scale? Where are you in terms of getting triggered and reacting to?
Well, life will give you the next level. So I just had gum graft surgery in October, and it was so painful. I had 4 children naturally, no pain medication. Then I had gum graft surgery. And so it was really painful. And so I invited all the pain, physical pain of all beings, and I breathed out compassion. And that was so beautiful because it was a different layer than I'd worked with before. Like I've grieved the loss of my beautiful animals, the loss of relationships, the death of my father, conflict in my family of origin with my brother, like big, deep grieving. And I've breathed in grief of all beings and let compassion. This physical pain in my mouth was a whole different, right? And so you're never really done. There's not like, it's just life gives you these great opportunities. And I took Oxy. And so I'm like, I'm just like, it's not an either or.
Right.
Yeah, for 3 nights so I could sleep, I took a narcotic. And during the day, I worked with Tonglen. I think sometimes people will, when you're in a black and white stage of development, will try and think of like judging something as good or something as bad. And I've been really vocal about this. Like, no, I took a narcotic for 3 nights in a row when I had that surgery and used it as a compassion building exercise.
And
yeah, it's an and.
And I can just see on that beautiful map that you have that starts with innocence at the bottom and wisdom at the top, that as we go through these evolutionary layers, we get closer and closer and we grow.
Yeah.
We grow in compassion and wisdom.
If we're willing.
if we're willing,
Mm-hmm.
if we're willing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many ways to take this conversation. I want to address some of the questions that have come up if you're willing to help with these. So one woman asks, if you forget, let's say somebody doesn't even know they have trauma, or if they forget it, whether that's consciously or subconsciously, we choose to forget that we have trauma, or we just don't want to dwell on the past. Does trauma still affect you?
Yeah, it's not like you have herpes or shingles or have an infection, right? You don't have trauma. Trauma is something that was an experience in your life, right? You don't have trauma. I find where it's a syntax that I'm playing with people right now because I'm seeing it as something that has to be healed like Lyme disease.
Yes.
I have trauma. I need to have a trauma-informed therapist who can help me heal
Extract the trauma.
Extract the trauma. It's like that's how it goes. You don't have it, you know? And so it's part of the intrinsic development of your perceptual field and habit of mind. And it's there right now. Until you have gone back and learned how to digest what your mind created as a belief system in a given moment. So you go back with the wisdom of today and you work with the one who had that mind in that moment. And this is called secure attachment. You're learning how to attach securely to your inner self. So it's always informing us, and you don't have to remember trauma. That's not necessary. People are always so worried about this conversation because the people that have had, big capital T stuff, it's not fun to think about, oh, do I have to go back and relive that, right? The things that went bump in the night. And, no, you don't. The example that I gave you of coming home and eating sweets and then in adulthood fueling myself, right? As an emotional eater, so to speak, and then learning that, oh, this isn't a very good habit, right, of mind that I have. In Ayurveda, we talk about 6 tastes. And so they're sweet, sour, pungent, bitter, and salty. And those are also kinds of experiences in life: sweet, sour, bitter, astringent, and salty. So the only one on there that we really like is sweet. The other 4, 5 are not ones that we love, right? We can really get underneath salty because that's where we cry. Sweet and salty we kind of have, but there are these 4 that are like bitter. I don't really like to have a bitter taste in my mouth when I've had an interaction with a person, or pungent, which is heat, right? So anger, sour, so resentful. These are kind of the places where our menu options when you go out to dinner don't reflect a real good balance of bitter and astringent and sour and pungent. We love our sweet and we love our salty. I got that when I was younger, like, oh, whenever I haven't had enough sweet experience in a day, that means my expectations haven't been met. I reach for it from my palate. That's an unhealthy balancing. That's not okay. And I began to work with that. So you're just kind of like the tapestry of the fiber of your mind has all this woven into it because it's part of the human condition. So what you do with it now is to learn how, like, children usually don't love Brussels sprouts or vegetables, the way that, well, the way probably our parents make them. Boiling Brussels sprouts wasn't that great. So, and so we develop a taste for things like that when we're older if we give ourselves a chance. It's the same thing. You're developing a taste for bitter and sour and astringent. You're recognizing, right, that a little bit of pungent, a little bit of cumin, a little bit of paprika, it's actually, it increases the heat, which is needed for good digestion, right?
And it actually tastes pretty good. It actually tastes pretty good too in the right recipes.
But you can overdo it.
You can overdo anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Um, so, in relation to that question, here's another one. Are there good ways to access anything that our body knows, but that we, imagining that we is the brain, can't remember? A couple of serious things have come up with this individual who was unexpectedly sad, so she just stayed with her body, let it cry, talk to it, listen to it right back. Whereas in the past, she would have found something else to try to do to cheer herself up. So the question is, are there good ways, paths into access those things that the body knows, but that we can't remember?
Yeah. I would release any attachment to remembering. The mind is so wise, it will unfold as it feels safe to unfold at the rate that you are willing to allow for it to unfold. And so sitting with uncomfortable feelings without judgment of them, without trying to change them is called empathy. Think of how often if someone's crying next to you, you hand them a Kleenex and say, it's going to be okay. They're there. It's okay. Don't cry. How many times did you hear that as a child? Don't cry. Well, that's not empathy. That's you trying to soothe yourself because you're uncomfortable with someone's discomfort. So empathy is when you can sit with uncomfortable feelings without trying to change them. With the body is showing up and the mind is showing up, the heart is showing up. And if you can just be witness to that, sit there with that uncomfortable feeling, you'll notice it will actually digest and go through. So emotions come in waves. So, but if you're figure or outerer, I call it, any of us with capital T trauma have a really powerful figure or outerer because when we were children in a traumatic situation, if I can control my environment, I can be safe is a big belief system we put together. So we become control freaks. And I think that's the biggest addiction of all humans anyway. Yeah.
Raising my hand for those of you who can't see this.
That's right. That's right. And so I call it the figure or outerer. And I have a lot of compassion for that one that's present in me now. It's like, oh, this isn't something to figure out. It's okay. I've got you. Right. Just be still. You're all right. And so then it's like, what is it that you need right now? What is it that you're trying to convey to me? And it's working on that feeling level from the body, from the heart, from the mind without like the cerebral activity of intelligence taking over, right? And hijacking the entire system.
As you wisely said close to the beginning, moving from doing to being.
Yeah.
And just allowing whatever needs to come up to come up.
Yeah.
Let it arise. This has been such a beautiful discussion. I am mindful that we have gotten to the top of the hour, and I'm wondering if there's anything that I haven't asked that you would love to touch on or that you really feel compelled that you'd like to share.
I would just say that underneath what are called in Buddhism obscurations to your true nature, which is brilliant. Your true nature is brilliant beyond measure. I'm not talking about brilliant intelligence. I'm talking about brilliance. And those obscurations are things that are like shrouds in front of a diamond from shining like mud. And as you do this digestive process, as you work with each facet on that diamond and clear it away, then from inside, you shine a little bit brighter. There's this really great Hindu goddess. I don't know if you can see her gold here.
Yes.
She's often called she who is never not unbroken. And it is said in many different spiritual traditions that, Rumi also said it, that as you allow those protective mechanisms from childhood to really let go and to shatter, your brilliance can finally shine through and your true nature will be visible to you. And so that doesn't require earning a space on the planet, of being worthwhile. Your worth is already at 100%. And there's nothing that you have to do in order to be worthwhile, to live. And many of us with trauma haven't really believed that until we've digested enough of this to get that.
And with that, so much gratitude and love for you and this conversation, and for the uplifting and expansion of humanity. I mean, this conversation, may we all awaken to who we truly are.
Yeah.
And can you imagine a world where we each take responsibility to heed the call? You can see that.
Absolutely can.
Yeah. I love it so much.
Yeah.
Keesha, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I can't wait to talk with you again. I thank you so much for this. I know that people are going to have to listen to this a couple of times, because sometimes we don't get things right away, but we change. And as we change and develop, we can then absorb and digest what we need to and what we can.
Exactly. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Take good care.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends and family, and if you feel inspired, please leave a quick review so other people can find it too. Now, if you want to beat autoimmune and thrive, make sure you sign up for my free video training at freeautoimmunetraining.com. That's freeautoimmunetraining.com, and watch the first video right away. Take good care. Bye for now.